welcome to the first of a new series of online talks, Beneath the Waves with the Marine Conservation Society. Thank you very much for joining us on this very beautiful evening. I hope it's beautiful where you are. I was tempted to see if I could host this from outside with a beer, but I've decided to save that for a bit later. So my name is Miranda Krestovnikoff. I'm an MCSC champion, author, broadcaster, mother of two, diver. I'm passionate about anything in, on or under the water. Marine conservation is obviously a big part of that for me. I'm lucky enough to have a family of water babies who all enjoy diving, and we're looking forward to some epic UK adventures this summer around Skomer and the Isle of May and Alderney and the Channel Islands. And I've been connected with Marine Conservation Society for many years. I'm really delighted to be hosting this first webinar this evening. I'm also delighted to introduce our speaker, Dr. Peter Richardson, who is Head of Ocean Recovery at the Marine Conservation Society. Now, Peter's worked for the charity for the last 21 years, where he currently oversees work on marine protected areas, the UK Overseas Territory Conservation Programme, and the volunteer diver seabed recording programme called Sea Search. He's also spearheaded our community voice method stakeholder engagement work with his wife, Sea Ranger, the MCS social science lead. Peter is a self-confessed turtle nerd. We'll be talking about turtles a bit later, I'm sure, having spent many years running turtle conservation and research programs overseas, including places in projects in Greece, Sri Lanka, and in the Caribbean. And Peter lives in Ross and Wye with Sue and their two teenagers and 3 cockapoos as well, but they're apparently going to be very silent this evening. So before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you've heard it all before, but if anybody's got any questions this evening for either of us, please can you use the Q&A facility on your screen? That makes it easier for us to work out what's what. And if you've got any general comments, just use the chat box for anything that you'd like to share. We will try and get through all the questions this evening, but if we can't and you've got a question that you really would like answered, please email us at info@mcsuk.uk. Sorry, I'll get that right. info@mcsuk.org. The talk this evening is being recorded and it will be made available on the MCS website a bit later. So Peter, welcome this evening. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I am upstairs looking out over the lovely woods surrounding Ross and Wye, and it's just so beautiful out there. A lovely evening. I'm very pleased to be here talking to you. I'm just going to share
your screen because we've got something to talk about, haven't we?
We have.
So we were chatting earlier.
Can you see that?
I've got a different screen to everybody else. So.
I can see.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Yes. So that is you and I on quite an interesting filming day that we did with the One Show a few years back. Were we down in Falmouth or something?
That's right. Yes.
Falmouth. Yeah. Talking about barrel jellyfish.
Yes.
And I don't know what your recollections were from that day, but I just remember that basically every bit of my body that wasn't covered in neoprene, I had to put Vaseline over, and you assured me wholeheartedly that we wouldn't get stung by any of the jellyfish, and it was all absolutely fine because barrel jellyfish really aren't harmful or in any way stingy to humans. And then I remember sitting in the car on the way home, driving back to Bristol. I was heading back for an awards ceremony or something like that, and all the way home I could just feel my lips tingling and sort of burning and expanding, and I felt like I'd had collagen implants, and I was really worried that I was going to turn up in front of loads of people looking like I just had a sort of Katie Price done, but I was okay at the end. But it was a fun day, wasn't it?
It was a lovely day. Actually, you know, I've been at MCS, like you say, for 21 years, and one of the highlights, I have to say, but also, you know, the jellyfish really got their revenge for us molesting them, because when I was on the boat with you, the director said, "Oh, could you lift one out to show, you know, so we could show it to the camera." And of course, barrel jellyfish are big, heavy jellyfish. But yes, of course, I got the net over, caught a jellyfish, hauled it on board, and I felt something go. And anyway, carried on with the shooting. Anyway, it turns out that I actually got a hernia from lifting that bloody great jellyfish over the side of the boat and onto the boat. So yeah, you got the stingy face, I got the hernia, and the jellyfish got their revenge. But it was a good day, despite all that.
Rather unusual. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I'm now going to hand over to you, and we'll catch up a bit later for some questions.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ocean rewilding and restoration, and how that can be a solution to help us fight the climate and nature crises. I mean, I'm not really a climate change expert. As Miranda said, I'm very much a turtle nerd, and that has been my background. But as I've worked in MCS, I've sort of become aware of the climate and its interactions with the ocean, and it's become a major part of the work that we do. So as you all know, the ocean there's one ocean. This is the Spillhouse projection, and it provides us, it helps regulate our climate, it provides us with oxygen, gives us food, it gives us energy, it is very good for our health and well-being, as long as you don't, molest the jellyfish. And it also absorbs CO2 and heat. And in fact, it absorbs up to about a quarter of the anthropogenic, the human carbon emissions that we chuck out there. So it is really important. But when I'm thinking about climate change, I do revert back to my turtle nerd roots, and I think about what's in it for the turtles. In particular, this turtle, who we'll call Trevor, who was a male green turtle that I met in Montserrat when we were doing some work out there last year, who approached me very hopeful that this shape in the gloom was a lovely fertile female, and actually it turned out to be me. So you can see that he soon changed his mind and swam off. Trevor did find what he was looking for eventually, and did what he knew he had to do to ensure a future for the species. But sadly for turtles, despite the fact they've been around, well, sea turtles have been around for about 120 million years, climate change is a real problem for them. Not only does it impact their habitats, but as some of you may know, turtles, the sex of a turtle is determined by the temperature at which the eggs are incubated in the sand in the nest. And the warmer the nests are, the more females are produced in the incubation process. So as global warming increases the warmth of our global surface, then more female turtles will be produced if they don't adapt, and male turtles like Trevor will become increasingly scarce, and you can understand why that is a problem for turtle populations. And indeed, our climate is warming. It's warming at an unprecedented rate, as I'm sure you're all aware. And not only is it warming, and that is warming ocean temperature, but the fact that the ocean is absorbing more and more carbon dioxide is exacerbating climate change's evil twin, ocean acidification, where the carbon changes the chemistry of the ocean water. It becomes more acidic and the pH drops, as shown by this graph. That's a problem for any sea creature that makes the shell, because the acidic water can constantly dissolve and attack the shell of shell creatures. And some species, if we carry on like this, some species won't survive at all. A lot of species will become smaller as they constantly put more resources, not into growth, but into maintaining their constantly dissolving shells. So quite frightening consequences for marine biodiversity. And of course, climate change, it's already disrupting our weather systems. And Trevor in Montserrat and the people of Montserrat are already feeling that. They're getting more frequent storms, more damaging hurricanes. The hurricanes are not only inflicting damage on land, but they're also smothering reefs, smothering seagrass beds. Things are going to get chaotic if we continue on this path. And not only is it affecting the biodiversity, but it's affecting us. It's as equatorial areas and tropical areas become more and more hostile, then people will want to move out to places where they're safer, and the migrant crisis will increase. Here in the UK, we're also feeling the effects of climate change and the projected impacts of sea level rise and flooding are devastating to huge swathes of the country. I'm showing this graphic. I'm sorry, it's very complicated, but it's because it's from the International Panel on Climate. Sorry, International Panel on Climate Change. I've got the acronym wrong there. And it's their 2022 latest report, Impact, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. And basically, this shows the dark circles with the little lines through them show the adverse impacts that we know are happening as a result of climate change, and these are on human systems. So the regions are down on the left-hand side, and then the various sort of impacts on human factors are on the top. And you can see that there's already known impacts on water scarcity, agriculture and production, and fisheries. There's impacts on health and well-being. There's impacts on infrastructure like flooding, like I've already talked about. And these are documented known impacts that the IPCC has listed in its latest report. And it's not only that us that are suffering, obviously ecosystems are suffering too. And again, on this graphic, you've got the regions down on the left-hand side, so around the world, and then you've got the known impacts on ecosystem structure, on species, the shifts in species, and changes in species phenology, so when they breed or when their life cycles happen. And you can see these dark spots again are known impacts that climate change is having on different ecosystems around the world. It's happening. Now, the IPCC report also recognizes that protecting and restoring ecosystems is essential for maintaining and enhancing the resilience of our world, of the biosphere, and also that if we continue to degrade and lose ecosystems, and that can exacerbate the problem and cause greater greenhouse gas emissions. So as you know, and as MCS has highlighted, we are mistreating our oceans. So the effects of climate change are all in the context of ongoing mismanagement. So we know, for example, there's overfishing. So despite significant improvements in the last decade or so, still 41% of our local fisheries in the Northeast Atlantic are subject to overfishing. Again, there's been recent improvements, but we know that the large predatory fish species in the Atlantic have declined massively in over the last 50 to 60 years, including sharks. We now know globally that a third of sharks are threatened, are on the IUCN Red List, threatened with extinction, again, mostly through overfishing. And that's not just something that happens overseas, that happens here too. So we've got endangered and critically endangered fish and shark species here in the UK, including, for example, the angel shark, which used to be much more common in our seas and is now considered critically endangered, very, very rare, and has probably suffered as a result of the destruction of its habitat through bottom-toe gear. The very habitats that might help us with climate change, and I'll talk about these in a minute, known as blue carbon habitats. Well, we've lost most of those too. We've lost 85% of salt marsh, 90% of our seagrass meadows in the UK over the last century. Now, we have got huge organic carbon stores on our seabed, and this paper from 2021, from last year, estimated that in our entire economic zone, we have about 524 megatons of organic carbon stored in the top 10 centimeters of our seabed. And that should be there for perpetuity. But we also know that the way that we're fishing on our seabed actually stirs up the top 10 centimeters of sediment when it's being impacted. And it actually re-releases that carbon back into the system. We don't know if it goes back into the atmosphere, but we do know that it goes back into the water column, and that will impact water chemistry and actually the productivity of our oceans that we depend on so much. And in fact, there was an estimate a couple of years ago which suggested that if we carry on the trajectory that we're on, then the damage to our carbon stores on the seabed will be worth about £9 million, £9 billion worth of damage in the next 25 years if we carry on doing what we're doing. So we are in a climate and nature emergency. Before COP26 last November, the UN Secretary General called the climate crisis code red for humanity. Now, this isn't a guy that sort of uses words lightly. This is a man who is responsible for the welfare of nations and of nations working together. And when he says that we're in climate crisis is code red for humanity, then we should listen. Now, we did make some gains for ocean conservation at COP26. The overall outcome wasn't as good as we needed it to be, but for ocean it was great. And that's largely as a result of campaigning over many, many years by lots of NGOs, and MCS got involved in that too through last year and actually at the COP. So the text of the Glasgow Climate Pact now recognises the importance of ensuring the integrity of ecosystems, including the ocean. It recognises that conserving and restoring ecosystems plays a critical role in the fighting biodiversity loss and fighting the climate crisis. But it also recognises that by protecting and conserving and restoring ecosystems, including marine ecosystems, we can make sure that they become an important sink for the carbon that we emit. And ocean-based solutions can play a big role. I mean, I won't go too much into this graph, but this is from a report a couple of years ago, which showed that the red line along the top is the current policy position that we're taking, and those are the emissions that will happen. Now, the green and blue lines are the policy positions and the actions that we must the green and blue lines are the emissions that will result from the actions we must take to get to keep warming below 1.5 or 2 degrees C. And you can see that there's a big gap in the emissions that we are projected to emit if we carry on, and what we need to be emitting if we're going to keep 1.5 alive. And ocean-based solutions are being calculated to make up, can probably help us make up 25% of that gap. And ocean-based solutions cover a wide range of things, some things that MCS is involved with and some things that they're not. So for example, by offshore wind and decarbonising our economy and going to renewable energy, obviously that's key. But also there are other renewable energies involved in the ocean. We can decarbonise international shipping and our domestic shipping. Aquaculture can help us. Seabed storage of CO2 can help us, but then so can ecosystem restoration, not only of the seabed and of the marine biodiversity, but also some of these key coastal habitats such as seagrass, salt marsh and mangroves. Now we are making progress. You know, the UK is a leader in offshore wind, and okay, offshore wind does have its issues, but we need renewables and we need to invest in offshore wind. And so long as it's done with minimum biological impact, then MCS is very, very supportive of that. And in fact, we're making great progress. But just investing in renewable energy is not enough. We've also got to have a complete system change. We've got to move towards a circular economy. I mean, if we just look at plastic, for example, global plastic production increased to about 300 million tons in 2014. And without changes to the way we're doing, it's predicted to triple by 2050. And that can account for 20% of our annual oil consumption and 15% of the global annual carbon budget. So we need, you know, MCS is working on these issues. We're pushing for a circular economy because we know we must reduce our dependence on single-use plastic, not only for the ocean and for biodiversity, but also to help us fight climate change. And of course, we're not alone. There's a lot of people around the world that understand this, they're not working on this. And in fact, this is the beginning of the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. And the UN decade of ecosystem restoration is all about protecting and restoring biodiversity, but also helping us fight climate change. So what is blue carbon? So blue carbon, what I mentioned earlier, basically it's carbon captured by living organisms in marine environments and then stored in the biomass and sediments, mostly sort of plants like salt marshes, seagrass and mangroves. Those are the poster child blue carbon habitats. Oops. So with blue carbon, what's interesting about it, for example, in seagrass and salt marsh, is that those habitats will store the carbon deep in the sediment. So unlike in forests where the carbon is stored in the trees and the trees will rot and the carbon goes back into the system, or they set on fire and then that goes back into the atmosphere, the blue carbon in these systems is stored deep in the sediment and hopefully for perpetuity. And it's estimated that these blue salt marshes, for example, can capture carbon 2 to 4 times greater than forests. If we move on to seagrass, although seagrass account for a very small area of the world's ocean, we think they capture about 10% of the carbon buried in the ocean sediment each year. And per hectare, seagrasses far outperform terrestrial forest in terms of the storage of carbon. But it's not just those sort of poster child blue carbon habitats. There's such a thing as marine, there's fish carbon, they call it. So this is the carbon that's stored in the marine animals that live in the ocean. And this diagram is for a very interesting report that I recommend anybody reads from 2014, which shows that the fish populations capture carbon, whales capture carbon, marine animals, marine turtles. A lot of those animals will die and sink to the bottom, and the carbon is then stored on the seabed. While they're alive, those animals move around. Whales will feed at depth and then move to the surface where they defecate. That fertilizes the upper part of the water column. Phytoplankton feed on that, and that then also captures more carbon. So there's a whole sort of complicated carbon system involved with fish and vertebrates in the ocean. And in fact, it's been estimated that in the UK alone, our commercial fish stocks sequester about 1 million tons of carbon each year. Imagine if 100% of our fish stocks were well managed, how much more carbon those fish stocks could capture. So we fully believe that there's a need to rewild the ocean. And in fact, our work on marine protected areas over the last couple of decades has been all about trying to rewild the ocean. Now, rewilding has become a thing now. Rewilding Britain, partners on our blue carbon report a couple of years ago, have done a great job in making rewilding mainstream. Ed Sheeran wants to rewild swathes of the UK. Rewilding is mentioned in Parliament. It's even mentioned in policy. Rewilding Britain even won the top award at the Chelsea Flower Show this year. It's becoming mainstream. But what we don't have is that same kind of mainstream movement for rewilding the ocean, and that's definitely what we need. And rewilding is all about looking to the future. It's about allowing systems to restore themselves and replenish themselves. And in some cases, certainly on land, it's about reintroducing species, but we're not really talking about that in the ocean. And there's a lot of good reasons to be optimistic. There's another great paper. Again, if you get a chance, please do look it up and read it. A whole bunch of top marine scientists got together and they developed a roadmap for how we can rebuild our oceans and how we can rebuild our oceans to help fight climate change. They said rebuilding marine life represents a doable grand challenge for humanity, and I absolutely 100% agree with them. It's something that we can do, and we've got the skills, we know what we have to do. So for example, in the States, in Virginia, the Institute of Marine Science there have been restoring seagrass beds over the last 20 years. And they've managed to restore about 3,600 hectares of new seagrass beds in an area that had been pretty much scraped of all its seagrass. And basically they were starting with a blank canvas. And over 20 years, they've now got thousands of hectares of seagrass beds, sequestering carbon, providing very rich habitat for fish, nursery habitat for fish, and all sorts of other species, and helping us fight the climate change crisis. That paper, Rebuilding Marine Life, also talked about how we've managed to save the great whales through collaborative action. So we knew that the whales were becoming extinct decades ago. Together as a global community, we agreed that we should stop hunting them. Most of us did. And in recent assessments, 47% of the populations of great whales that have been assessed are showing increases, population increases, 40% unchanged and only 13% decreasing. So again, with the whales, they give us hope. We knew what we had to do, we did it, and we got results. The populations of those animals are increasing. And it's not, it's not just a biodiversity gain. Some economists a couple of years ago looked into the value of a whale, and they worked out that that whales, one whale is worth, sorry, I think it's two, dear, excuse me. Miranda, help me out. I can't see the top line. I think it's £2 million. $2 million. Is it per whale?
$2 million. Yeah.
Yes, $2 million. So they worked out that one whale is worth $2 million, and that's because of all the services that the whale provides. So the whale It plays an important part in the food chain, and it also, as I said, it fertilizes the ocean with its poo. It creates lots of phytoplankton. Phytoplankton enriches the food chain. Food chain helps fish stocks. It captures CO2. When the whale dies, it's captured carbon. It sinks to the bottom. It has a carbon value as its body rots and the carbon seeps into the ocean floor. And then, of course, you know, we like to go and watch them. And so whale watching in the whale watching industry alone is estimated to be about £2 billion. And the whole stock of great whales is estimated to be trillions of pounds. So, you know, it makes biological and economic sense to restore our ocean, and the whales, as I say, give us hope. So we worked on marine protected areas over the last few decades, and we need to see much better protection. At the moment, there's only a very small percentage of the seas are protected. And we've mostly been working in the UK. So when I first started at MCS, there were very few MPAs. Now we've got 374 and they cover 38% of our seas. That's great progress. But unfortunately, only a few of those are actually fully protected. Our Marine Unprotected Areas report last year highlighted how many of our MPAs, particularly offshore, are subjected to damaging bottom trawling. So we know that damages the seabed, it damages biodiversity, it damages the carbon stocks, and that really needs to change fast. But again, there's been a bit of progress there. Certainly the Westminster government has committed to managing fishing in all our offshore MPAs by 2024. The first measures came into place last Monday. So Dogger Bank, which is a huge MPA in the North Sea, now no longer has trawling in it, bottom trawling, and so the biodiversity in there on the seabed and the carbon is protected. And it's something like 4.4 megatons of carbon in the Dogger Bank that we've estimated. The Scottish government's also making great progress with managing bottom trawling out of its offshore MPAs. So we're going in the right direction. It just needs to happen faster. We also need to scale up our restoration, and some of us are. So we've been involved in this project called DEEP, which is the Dornoch Environmental Enhancement Project, and that is working with Watt University and Glenmorangie Whiskey, one of my favourites, I have to say. And that the whole vision of that project is to create 40 hectares of native oyster reef involving millions of oysters, and tens of thousands of already are in place doing their work. Learning lessons from that project, we're also involved in the WWF-led Restoration 4th project, which is looking to restore 4 hectares of seagrass and 30,000 oysters in oyster reef restoration in the 4th. And again, that's a multi-partner project, and we're one of the partners. We're also doing some work in another multi-partner project in Wales called Nature and Biff. We're the only marine element of that project. Most of the other work is terrestrial, where again, we're looking to restore seagrass and oyster reef beds in North and South Wales. And that project has just started, so that's very exciting. And then there are other big sort of national projects. So in England, there's the Ray Mamare project led by Natural England, and that is looking to, that is on track to restore 800 hectares of salt marsh, 25 hectares of seagrass meadows, and I think 60 hectares of oyster beds, plus some kelp forest projects. And by restoring these salt marshes, not only are we creating new blue carbon habitat and new biodiversity for birds and fish and insects and the rest of it, we're also creating nice soft coastlines that are going to help us mitigate against any future sea level flooding as a result of sea level rise. So very, very sensible investment in creating habitats. We're involved in the Life Remedies project run by Natural England, and again, this is about seagrass restoration. So we're restoring seagrass in Jennycliff Bay, in the Solent Maritime area, and the Plymouth Sound. And then MCS is also working with the Ocean Trust, developing and installing advanced mooring systems in places where boats moor amongst seagrass to actually protect that seagrass from the damage of mooring through advanced technology. And then a real game changer in terms of restoration was the Sussex Inshore Fishery and Conservation Authority's nearshore trawling bylaw, which is protecting a huge swathe of nearshore habitat along the entire Sussex coast basically they've managed trawling out of the whole orange area that you can see on that map, which means that certainly in West Sussex, around Littlehampton, Pagham and Chelsea, there's huge potential for what was once huge kelp forests that have been massively sort of depleted over the years. There's huge potential now for those to grow back, and that project is supported by the Kelp Restoration Project, which we're also members of. So things are happening. We're trying to do something, and it's not just us. There's lots of other people too. But we need to act faster. So we need at least 30% of our seas in highly protected marine protected areas by 2030, with at least 10% of those being fully protected. Then that means in the highly protected ones, we manage out all the damaging fishing activities and we allow some of the low impact fisheries. In the 10% of fully protected marine protected areas, we exclude all extractive activities to allow the ocean to rewild itself in those areas. As I said, the Westminster has made some interesting noises about protecting protecting the offshore MPAs from bottom to toe gear by 2024. They've already made a good start with that project. We need to make sure that they're held to that. We want to expand the bottom towed fishing gear free zones around the entirety of the UK, around the UK coast. So we want to build on the game-changing example of the Sussex Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority, and we really need the government to scale up to help better support the restoration of these blue carbon habitats and our marine habitats for biodiversity and for climate change. Again, it's not just us that's saying this. The UK Climate Change Committee made recommendations this year. They said that the UK government and devolved administrations should be strengthening protection and strengthening restoration in marine areas and spending more money on it. And we absolutely 100% agree with that. Now, last year, the UK government launched its new green bond package. And I think they got about 10 billion pounds worth of investment, with another 90 billion pounds worth of orders. So there's obviously an appetite in business to invest in our future and invest in green initiatives. But how about some blue investment? How about a blue bond package? So I'm winding up now. The ocean does take care of us, but it's time for us to return that favor. Not only for us, but also for all the little Trevors out there who also share this planet and this wonderful ocean with us. And of course, we've also got to rewild ourselves. One of the things that we've got to do is to make sure that it's not just down to the future generations to solve this. We've got to solve it, but we've also got to inspire our children to love this planet and love our ocean and immerse them in it. And we need to rewild our children as much as possible. And if you're interested in knowing how much more there is out there to do and what resources are out there to increase our ocean literacy, then by all means do look at the We Are Ocean website that we are partners on. So I'm hopeful. The challenge is huge, the challenge is massive, but I think we can do this, and it's just up to us to act. It's up to us to force our governments to act and to do the things that we need to do to restore and rewild our ocean and help fight climate change. And that is my message for the evening. Sorry if I went on a bit.
No, that was amazing. Thank you, Peter, very, very much. That was really thought-provoking, really inspiring. An absolute whistle-stop tour of all the work that MCS is doing and trying to put everything into context. And it sparked some really interesting questions from our audience this evening. So thank you, everybody who has written questions. We'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. I just wanted to sort of touch on something that you talked about at the end. You know, you and I are both parents. We've both got teenage children. How do we support, empower, inspire the next generation with, I mean, I find it very hard to talk about all the doom and gloom. I'm a very positive person and I want to talk about great, wonderful wildlife experiences. But in the back of my mind, I'm very mindful that maybe I don't talk about some of the really, really big issues that we need to be aware of. How do you obtain the balance or achieve the balance with your family at home?
It's a great question, and it's difficult. I mean, my daughter's 15. She doesn't want to watch the news anymore, and to be honest, I don't blame her. And sometimes I have weeks like that too. But I think it's all about making sure that that we realize that there's still beauty out there, that there is still a lovely, beautiful planet. Some of it is damaged, but some of it is still absolutely wonderful. And you don't have to travel across the world to see it. You can just step into a local green space. You can just go down to the park. You can go to the river. If you're lucky enough, you can go down to the sea. And it's and I think, what I've tried to do with my kids is get them into those spaces as much as possible, and get them in the sea or in the river or just in the woods. A bit of forest bathing, it always does you good. And then, because they are connected with that beauty and that environment, they feel inspired to do something about it, and they are quite energized. Obviously there's Greta Thunberg and lots of other young people that are shouting about this and doing what they can to make us listen and act. So I am quite hopeful. I mean, my daughter is incredibly clued in the whole inclusivity debate, much more so than I was when I was her. When I was 15, I had no idea about any of that stuff, and now she's right up there, and she's constantly correcting me about terminology and pronouns and all that sort of thing. And I love it. I love the fact that she's so engaged. And I think there are, there's definitely hope out there, and I think you do have to be positive, but you do also have to encourage young people to get the knowledge, because knowledge is power, and once they've got the power, they can use it. And I think that's what's happened with Greta Thunberg, and that's why we're seeing this big youth movement, because they've educated themselves, they know what needs to happen, and they're telling us to do it. So but I think the key thing is just to be is positive kindness and beauty, and that's what I think young people need, and they respond to. Sorry if that makes me sound like an old hippie. No, I do believe it.
No, I think we need a lot more positivity, actually, and I agree with you about not watching the news. I just find I'm turning off more and more nowadays, but again, in the back of my head, I feel like I'm disconnecting myself with what's going on. But
it's a balance.
Sometimes it's just too big, and we just can't really, my brain can't cope with it some days. So yeah, we've had some really, really good questions coming in, so I'm just going to go to some of those, a lot of them echoing the same sort of thoughts. And so people are talking about marine protected areas. Now, I was at a diving and marine conference recently. I was talking about marine protected areas and how important they were. And like you, I can see the changes in marine protected areas, that you've been diving or monitoring them for 10, 20 years. It's amazing how life does just regenerate. But there's a bit of confusion, and people are asking about why we're allowed to fish and trawl in protected areas. Somebody commented, we don't allow farmers to plough up the new forest, so why are we allowing fishermen to carry out ground trawling? Why are there so many different levels of protection? Why aren't all the marine protected areas offered that very high level of protection? And how do we go about policing that as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the way that marine protected areas have been set up in the UK is confusing and complicated. It's different in the different devolved administrations. And often we've taken a feature-based approach. So a marine protected area may cover an area, but within that area, there are much smaller sort of habitats like patch reefs or seagrass beds or what have you. And it's those little areas that are protected, and then fishing is allowed to happen, or bottom toe gear is allowed to happen around those. I mean, I'm generalizing now, and that for us, that doesn't make sense. We believe there should be a whole site approach. So if you've got an area of sensitive habitat, then at the moment all we can see is what it is now, because it's been impacted by all that fishing and bottom toe gear over the years. So it's been reduced, it's been degraded to this area. Actually, if you stop all that fishing and stop the trawling, then the more likely than not, in some habitats, the habitats and the species will proliferate and grow out, and the feature, the reef or whatever, will expand and grow and fill the space. So yeah, we don't agree with that feature-based approach. We think there should be a whole site approach. I think there are definitely some fishing methods that are lower impact than others. And certainly in inshore sites where whole economies have been built around sort of fishing and nautical heritage, and they still persist today, then you have to take into account those people's livelihoods. So, for example, we work in Cromer, and Cromer Shoal Chalkbed is a marine conservation zone, and we're working closely with the crab fishermen there, famous Cromer crab fishermen, and it's a balance. But that fishery a long time ago lobbied the government to exclude bottom-toed gear from the Cromer reef, and that happened. So those guys have been protecting the reef for decades, and now the challenge is to work with those fishermen to make sure that what they do remains low impact, and where they so there are some practices we know that might damage some bits of the chalk reef, and we have to work with those fishermen to allow them to develop new ways of fishing or new areas of fishing to allow that local economy to continue and to protect it, but also to allow the reef to thrive. And it is possible, and it might be a long game and a complicated process where you're trying to get lots of people's views and create a fishing action plan that is good for people and the reef, and that's a challenge. But it's worth doing, because as soon as you've got the fishermen on board with your management measures, then you've got the battle is sort of won, if you like. You've got a win-win situation. But some fishing practices are inherently destructive, and dragging heavy gear over sensitive seabed habitats is archaic. It's not sustainable, and we really need to invest in the industry to change that, to change the way fishing happens. Not to kill the industry, but to invest in it, enhance it, make it fish in a way that isn't damaging the seabed, and create new jobs in the process, so that the seabed can thrive, and so can the industry. Unfortunately, 70% or something like that of the fish that we land in the UK are caught with bottom-toed gear. So again, it's a big challenge, and it is up to society and governments to take on that challenge and invest in the industry and make it a lot more sustainable.
Brilliant, thank you. So you talked quite a bit about rewilding. I mean, it's a very mainstream movement on land. We're not really talking about it much in the sea. It's quite a novel thing to be talking about rewilding the oceans. So we've had a couple of questions about this. Iris asked about what the actions that everyday people can take to help rewilding the ocean. And we've also had a question from Annie. Says, regarding rewilding, from a terrestrial perspective, there's a lot of contention regarding what the baseline is that rewilding is aiming to return to. Is there a similar issue with ocean rewilding? How do you decide what your baseline is? How do you balance that with current social demands on the oceans, etc.? So that's quite complicated, but maybe just a bit more about ocean rewilding.
It's a good question. It's a good question. But I think one of the things that was in my slide, which I probably didn't mention, was that rewilding is very much future focused. So rewilding is probably the wrong term. It's wilding, because I don't even know if we can go back to what once was, because everything has changed so much. There's loads more people in the planet than there was a couple of 100 years ago. The climate has changed. That's probably not going to change back to what it was a couple of 100 years ago. So the conditions are different. So I think for me, wilding or rewilding is all about just giving nature a space to breathe and to become what it's going to become. And because we don't do that enough, certainly in the marine space, the number of no-take zones we've got in the UK is tiny. So we don't really, we're not, our reference point for what could happen is really limited. So you've got a really good example in Lamlash Bay, off the coast of Arran. The community there fought to create a no-take zone off their coast. It's been studied extensively by the University of York, led by Bryce Stewart, and his research has shown that it works. That when you stop towing stuff along the seabed, then the seabed rebounds and the biodiversity increases and the size of the animals increases and the number of the animals increases. And so I think we just need to do more of that so that we can see what's possible. And it's not really about going back, it's about seeing what's possible in the future for me. And I think that's really what Rewilding Britain is also, you know, for terrestrial rewilding. I think that's what it's all about. And I think the question about why have we not got ocean rewilding, I think it's just because of that old problem that as Marine Conservation Society we've always faced, that the sea is out of sight, out of mind. And that was certainly the case when I started 21 years ago, but that's changing. Like, our ocean awareness is definitely changing. It's definitely better. And things like Blue Planet and the David Attenborough effect are real. You know, we've noticed massive increase in awareness and interest and volunteering as a result of some of those blue chip BBC shows. So we just need to keep on at it. But I don't really have the answer to how do we make ocean rewilding a thing like it's become on land. But I'm really hoping that, you know, we want to work with Rewilding Britain. We've worked with them in the past, and they've certainly done a good job in the terrestrial sphere. So we hope that working with them, we can, you know, make those changes in the marine sphere as well.
So that sort of leads on to this disconnect that a lot of people who don't live by the ocean probably feel. You know, if you're living inland, you know 50 miles from the ocean, you probably don't really have any, it doesn't really have any relevance to you in your life. What sort of things are you, a Marine Conservation Society, doing to try and make more of a connection? I mean, I know that there's an amazing project down in Cornwall. It's not MCS, but Dive Project Cornwall, where, you know, kids from all over the country are being trained to learn to scuba dive and spend, you know, a week down in Cornwall diving the seas around Porthkerris. And I just can't think of a better way of, you know, telling people about the oceans than actually chucking them in the ocean in the first place and actually showing them what's there. But obviously we can't get everybody to just put their heads underwater. Some people don't even want to. So how do you make that connection with people who just don't live anywhere by the sea?
It's a great question, and it's a challenge. I think we are involved to some degree in Dive Cornwall. I'm not quite sure, but I have heard our education team talking about it. And of course, we've got a crack education team who've done great work over the last few years, increasing our education offering. And of course, they're going into schools, they're going into schools, not only coastal schools, but inland schools too, and inspiring children with ocean conservation and positive ocean messaging. I mean, all drains lead to the sea, you know, and so in order to, and it's worth knowing that, because even if you live 70 miles from the sea, if you're flushing something down the loo, that could end up, you know, out of a storm flow into a river and out into the ocean, and eventually, you know, down a turtle's throat or something like that. So I think there are that, you know, understanding how water works and you know, developing our ocean awareness so that we realize that if we flush plastic down the toilet, that might end up in the ocean, is worth knowing. But then also, you know, people eat fish inland, of course, but they only eat about 5 different types of fish generally, and there's lots of other species of fish out there which we feel can be fished sustainably, that we think people should try. So go to the Good Fish Guide and work out what is a sustainable fish meal. I don't think you should eat fish every day, but well managed low carbon fisheries could definitely be a solution to producing low carbon animal protein. So you know, we definitely think that fisheries should be decarbonized and sustainably managed, and that people should eat sustainable fish. And that's, you know, the Good Fish Guide is all about helping you understand how to do that. But yeah, it's a challenge. But I also think not everybody can, but if you can go to a blue space, be it a river or a lake, or if you go to the sea, just go and do it. Go and feel it. Feel how good it makes you feel. You know, it's real. And when you get that feeling, it does compel you to act. It might even compel you to vote differently at the next election, when you realize that, you know, some candidates are serious about ocean conservation or climate change and some aren't. But just get out there and feel it. You know, it's free.
So touching on government policy, you know, is the government doing enough on this? We had a couple of questions about, is the government required government needing to push more on green initiatives, and what we can do as voters to try and influence that.
Yeah,
I'm quite positive about, what the government were doing, but obviously clearly they can do more. What can we do as voters to influence that without getting too
well? I think you need to scrutinize the parties and see what they're offering, and vote with your green and blue heart, actually. So I think, there's definitely been some movement and some traction in ocean conservation recently, but it's been slow and it needs to be faster. Like that IPCC report, and again, go read it. I mean, it is a grim read, but it's compelling. I mean, that does tell us that we've got, less than 10 years to make serious system changes in order to keep the temperatures down to what we need to keep them down at before it gets really chaotic. And that is going to potentially hurt us in the short term in terms of, our way of life changes. But we have to take that system change, and we have to vote in governments that are serious about it. And we need to vote governments that are prepared to invest in decarbonising our economy, and, as I was talking about, invest more in restoring our ocean, because it's not just about blue carbon and fighting climate change. We've been banging on about ocean conservation for decades. The ocean does so much for us. It's so good for our energy and our oxygen and our food and our biodiversity and our well-being, and we need to invest in it to restore it for all those things, and the blue carbon benefits, the stacked blue carbon benefits that it can also offer. So I think there's been some movement, but we just need to scale up. We need to quickly. We need to be fast, and we need to be serious about it.
Yeah. We had one question about the value of getting people to write to their MPs. Is that a useful thing? Because other people are asking about, the things that we can do as individuals. Is one of those things writing to your local MP?
Write to your MP or go and visit them in their local surgery. Get in their face, tell them what you think. I mean, obviously, you've got to. Writing to MP is definitely important. A handwritten letter, I know, makes a big difference. But I think going to talk to them is also good. But I also think people should. When there are climate change protests, I think people, go and do it. It's a great day out, and we need to be. Our views need to be seen. We need to be seen in numbers. So yeah, do all those things. Write to your MP. Go see your MP. Go out on the protests. Make your voice heard in whatever way you possibly can. Write to your local newspaper. Just get out there and say what you know needs to be done. And I'd say that to young people as well, because I mean, I know how frustrating it can be for young people who can't vote and who don't feel like they've got a voice, but they can. There are ways that they understand that I don't, where they can get their voice out there on social media. They can also go and talk to their MP. They can pester their parents. They can interrogate their parents when it comes to local and national elections to make sure that their parents know what they're voting for. And yeah, do it.
Make it sound like that's happened in your household.
Yeah, I mean, we have good conversations.
It's good to have those conversations with the kids, isn't it? Yeah. So are there a couple of people have asked about actions we can take in everyday life? If we've written to our local MP, if we've been to our local climate change march, what practical things can we do in our life? I mean, I always believe in these tiny little changes that you can make that do altogether make quite a lot of difference. What are your messages?
Yes, I think we can all do things, but I also don't think that we should feel guilty that we can't as individuals change it by ourselves. And it does take system change, and it does take the people that we elect to make changes to get us where we need to be. But in terms of things that you can do, there's all the standard stuff to help. I mean, climate change is the biggest threat to our ocean. There's there are lots of threats to our ocean, but for me, climate change is the big one. So if you can start tackling your contribution to climate change, then that's a good thing. So turn your devices off at night, drive less. I think you need to eat less meat. That's something that my family's been doing. And we try. We're definitely not perfect, but we are. We're finding out that actually vegetarian and vegan alternatives are absolutely incredible stuff that you can get now. So it's getting a lot easier. I mean, it's difficult. I took a train to London last week for the first time in a couple of years before the pandemic, and I was shocked at how much train tickets are. They are crazy. It's crazy that it costs more to get on a train to London than it does to drive, or it costs more to fly to Edinburgh from Bristol than it does to I mean, so it costs less to fly than it does to take the train. So there are sometimes it's a challenge. It's a challenge. If you can't afford it, it's a challenge. And again, that's why we need the system change. But I think it is about sort of consuming less and and reducing your carbon and consuming sensibly. And if you do want to eat meat, then don't buy it from some mass outlet. Buy it locally. Spend a tiny bit more money on it. Do it less, but buy it from. Cut down your food miles. Buy it from somewhere local where you know that where the product has come from. I'm sorry, I really don't have the answers to this. If I did, then maybe we'd have.
Well, I don't either, but it's really good to just sort of share some ideas and practical things you might do with your family. And I think we
try those things. Yeah. How about you? What do you do?
Well, my daughter is sort of going vegetarian straight vegan and is sort of pulling us all in with her, and that's great actually. And as a result, I'm buying a lot more vegan products, and we're not buying milk and we're not buying yogurt, and actually the vegan alternatives are amazing. And we all poo-pooed it and we all thought, oh, they're going to be rubbish, and actually we tried them and we thought actually that tastes really good. So there's a big changes in our household, and we still eat a bit of meat but a lot less than we used to, and a lot of vegetarian and vegan food. So and we do, but I agree with you about that. I've got a planning a trip up to the Isle of May, and I want to take the train to Edinburgh. And then I looked at the flights, and they're so much cheaper, especially if there's two of us going. And it's a really, really tricky decision to make. So especially when we're all feeling the pinch.
Yes, I did just see something come up, which was really, I haven't been able to keep track of the chat.
I know there's quite a lot going on in the chat.
But somebody did say that if you go to the sea, then take someone with you. Take someone with you, especially if they haven't been before.
Thank you, Sue.
That is great advice. Yeah. Oh, Sue, is that Sue? That's my Sue. Lovely. Yeah,
that's your Sue. Thanks, Sue.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. We've just got to get more and more people connected to this wonderful planet, and particularly the ocean. And so, that sort of thing is. In fact,
we were only talking today as a family about not doing things in isolation. It's very easy for us to go out and have a lovely walk or go and see the birds, but actually getting other people involved in some of the things that we do, especially if they would never be able to do those any other way, is really lovely. We have some kestrels in a box that we had ringed by a BTO guy a couple of weeks ago, and just bringing a couple of other families in and watching them being ringed was just wonderful. And we do it every year, so it's a bit run of the mill for us, but bringing other people in. So actually when you go to the sea next, if you're going for a dive or a snorkel, is there somebody you can take with you and introduce to that, or the wonders of wild swimming? So many things. Anyway, we're going to have to round up because we are pretty much out of time. Peter, thank you so much for being with us this evening and sharing so much of your knowledge and experience, and lots of really positive. I thought it was going to be more negative than this, but with lots of really, really positive stories, and lots of ways that we can all go and find out more as well. I know that you've got to leave us now because you've got an end of A-level celebration dinner. So
I have, yes, but I'm just looking at the chat number. There's 61 there, so I'm really looking forward to going through those chats, because I bet there's some really good suggestions in there that I'll definitely learn from. So thank you everybody for listening. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, and thank you so much for all the chat contributions. I'll definitely go through those. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Miranda, so much for giving us your time and having that chat. It's lovely to see you again.
My pleasure too. And thank you, our audience at home. Thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you've enjoyed that. Please join us again. We've got another talk like this on the 3rd of November with our guest host comedian, Zoe Lyons, chatting to Principal Specialist for Marine Protected Areas, Jean-Luc Solant. So, and also if you've been inspired by what you've heard this evening, our work, and you'd like to support us, please do consider donating, or even better, join MCS. Come and join us as a member. As a charity, we need vital funding to be able to continue our conservation work, and members are really, really important to us. You can also support us by volunteering, or you just go to the website to find out more. So that's mcsuk.org. So that's all from me. That's all from Peter. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.